Okay, welcome back. Hope you're all having a great week. Today we're continuing our review of our third BCBA practice exam, where we're going through 10 more questions and breaking them down together. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe. If you're looking for this exam, plus our other two, please check out bcbastudy.com. We also offer a 5th edition task list study guide and a combo pack, which includes everything plus flashcards. It's our best deal. If you're looking for tutoring, please send us an email and we can try to set something up. Continue asking questions, posting comments. We are happy to help. When you do pass your exam, let us know so we can include you in our shout out. Other than that, let's keep working hard, keep studying hard, get to our questions. Question 1, which of the following is known as an abscissa? Now, you might remember this from your RBT days. And if you don't, that's okay. It's one of those rote things that we just tend to neglect or forget as we're looking at these other important task list items. And this has to do with the line graph. The line graph, of course, is the most common graph we use in ABA. Therefore, they want you to know everything there is to know about line graphs as BCBAs. Are you going to get a question like this? Maybe, maybe not. It's hard to say. But it's important we're familiar at least with the different sections of the line graph. Things like our x-axis and our y-axis and our condition change lines and our titles and everything else in our legend and everything else that has to do with the most common graph we always use. The question just wants to know, do you know what an abscissa is, or another name for the abscissa? And it's going to be the x-axis. What's the other name for the y-axis? The ordinate. There's no trick here. There's no analysis. It's not an analytical question. It's almost a rote familiarization question, and that's why we included it, just so we're familiar with these other names for both the x-axis, which is the abscissa, and the y-axis, the ordinate. That's all there is. Question 2. Daniel receives in-clinic ABA services 3 days a week. Daniel usually has no issues when entering the clinic, but ever since his BCBA implemented a punishment procedure, Daniel will start to fight when entering the clinic. What explains Daniel's behavior? First things first is we always want to know what the question is asking about. And the question is asking about Daniel's behavior. We know before Daniel had no issues entering the clinic, and now Daniel fights when entering the clinic. So when we get a behavior question, we want to know antecedents, we want to know consequences, we want to know what changed. So what's changed ever since Daniel started to fight when entering the clinic? Previously, he wasn't fighting. All of a sudden, he's starting to fight. Well, the only thing that's changed is this BCBA has implemented this punishment procedure. So now when he goes to the clinic, what is he trying to do? Well, he's doing everything he can to get away from this clinic. Okay, so what explains this behavior? A, Daniel is most likely frustrated by something outside of the clinic. Why is this question wrong? Well, this word frustrated, right? We aren't going to describe Daniel's behavior using this mentalistic term. It doesn't get us any closer to solving the issue. If we're going to use frustrated, we need to use a operationally defined way of saying frustrated, not just Daniel was frustrated. That's the issue. Okay. A is out. B, the clinic has become a conditioned aversive stimulus. Okay. So what happened? Before, Daniel would go into the clinic just fine, but now, ever since punishment has started, this clinic is now signaling Daniel an aversive, right? It's become conditioned as an aversive stimulus. Daniel now sees this clinic and it's saying to him, punishment is in here. Okay. It's like if a parent starts to use spanking as a consequence for a behavior, the parent runs the risk of becoming an aversive stimulus, and the kid might start avoiding that parent. Punishment-induced aggression. A lot of negative things can come from punishment, right? That's why we always want to be aware of the ethical issues surrounding punishment, and we always want to try to use reinforcement first. Most likely, it's become a conditioned aversive stimulus. Well, let's look at C. The clinic is now an SD for negative reinforcement. Well, we're not sure exactly what's reinforcing Daniel's behavior, right? We don't know if Daniel gets to escape from this clinic, right? In order for the clinic to be an SD for negative reinforcement, that means that in the past, Daniel fighting has led to avoiding or escaping the clinic. And we're just not sure about that. For all intents and purposes, we still think Daniel is going every day. Just because he's fighting doesn't mean he's getting out of it, right? So we can't just say his behavior is being reinforced because we're not really sure. All we know is this BCBA implemented this punishment procedure, and now Daniel will do everything to avoid this aversive stimulus. And then finally, Daniel is going through an extinction burst. There is no indication we're using extinction. Good lesson here. If there's no indication that extinction has been used, don't pick it, right? People always make that mistake. They start to add information that's not there. They read Daniel was going through an extinction burst and they think, well, a temporary increase in behavior may be due to extinction. Nothing in this question talks about extinction. Don't just add information. All the information you need is in the question, okay? Don't add your own. So why is Daniel doing this? Parsimony, the simplest explanation would be ever since punishment has started, the clinics become a conditioned aversive stimulus. One key aspect to consider in order to ensure the effectiveness of a punisher is another punisher question. There are some guidelines when using punishment. Punishment is very different than reinforcement, right? Reinforcement, you might use different levels of reinforcement. We're going to have these different schedules of reinforcement. We're going to fade reinforcement. We're going to thicken schedules, on and on and on. Punishment's a lot more straightforward, right? And the rules are very set in stone if we're going to use a punisher, okay? So this question is asking about a key aspect in order to ensure the effectiveness of a punisher. One of them, meaning the other three are not key aspects, all right? So A, the punisher should be delivered on a continuous reinforcement schedule. Don't be fooled by this question. Yes, a punisher should be delivered every single time the behavior occurs, okay? That's one aspect of punishment. Anytime the behavior occurs, we deliver a punisher. But this question actually specifies a reinforcement schedule. We're not using a reinforcement schedule. You have to read carefully. B, the magnitude of the punisher should be consistent. Absolutely, this is a key aspect. Once you pick the highest level of magnitude appropriate for a punisher, you have to be consistent, okay? The same magnitude each time is what should be delivered. What about C? You should deliver the punisher on the same schedule as the reinforcer. It's just not true. If you are delivering reinforcement on, let's say, a variable interval schedule, you're not going to deliver punishment on a variable interval schedule. Punishment should be delivered every single time behavior occurs. And then D, once the behavior starts to decrease, you should reduce the magnitude of the punisher. Again, not true. Punishment, we need to pick a magnitude. We need to be consistent with that magnitude, and we need to deliver punishment every single time a behavior occurs. So one key aspect in order to ensure the effectiveness of a punisher is B, the magnitude of the punisher should be consistent. One positive element of a withdrawal design is what? We always talk about the ethical issues behind a withdrawal design. And by now, you should be very familiar with them, right? What is the biggest ethical concern with a withdrawal design? It's, well, if the intervention is working, do we want to remove the working intervention? More importantly, if we're trying to reduce a problematic behavior, do we want to reverse it and potentially bring back the problematic behavior, right? So we're all familiar with that. This question is switching it up on you, right? We now want a positive element, okay? What is a good element of a withdrawal design? A, you can compare multiple treatments at once. This is not a withdrawal design. In what experimental design do we compare multiple treatments? Well, an alternating treatment design, right? A multi-element design. The withdrawal design, if you're going to use, let's say, an ABC design, okay, you're using multiple interventions, you're not comparing them at once, right? Where you're still withdrawing and still reversing, okay? So A is just not correct. B, you can compare treatment across settings. Well, what experimental design do we compare across settings? We use a multiple baseline design. You can easily identify experimental control. Yes, a withdrawal design is the best way to establish and verify strong experimental control. Because with the withdrawal design, we are literally withdrawing the working intervention and watching what happens to the behavior. If that behavior goes back to baseline, once the intervention is withdrawn, and then we put the intervention back and it goes back to intervention levels, we have identified experimental control. That is a great element of the withdrawal design. And then finally, D, you can use it for behavior that is not reversible. That's not true, right? If our behavior is not reversible, that's a problem. If I'm using a withdrawal design to teach someone to add, okay, once I teach addition, it's typically going to maintain. Think about basic addition. We can all maintain, or we can all still add basic numbers. I can't really reverse that, okay? So one positive element of a withdrawal design is going to be C. You can easily identify experimental control. Which of the following behavior goals is most acceptable? Now, this question has been widely asked about, okay, and for good reason. We're more so trying to prove an ethical point, strangely enough, with this question, okay? And we'll talk about why, okay? So behavior goals, what do we know about behavior goals? We want them objective and we want them measurable, right? We don't want to be subjective. We want to be descriptive. We all know that. So we're going to look for the behavior goal that is most acceptable. The client will be polite to the neighbors when they come over to the house for 7 out of 10 trials when given the opportunity within 2 weeks of starting the intervention. Well, first, polite, that's kind of an issue, okay? Well, it's not really defined well. I'm not really sure what polite means. I'm from the South, and polite means something very different in the South than it does where I live now, which is Nevada. Very different, okay? So it just would not be a great goal, especially culturally, okay? The new ethical code specifically says we need to be culturally sensitive. Okay, so not only is this not well defined, it's not very culturally sensitive without a good definition. Additionally, this within 2 weeks of starting the intervention is an issue. Okay, why? Because ABA is a process. We never guarantee results. Setting this goal within 2 weeks of starting the intervention is almost telling the RBT or the parent or the client that within 2 weeks, this is going to work. What happens if it doesn't happen within 2 weeks, but happens within 3 weeks? Do they fail? That's just kind of an issue, okay? So it's kind of a poorly written goal. B, the client will increase bites of food taken during lunch from 5 bites to 10 bites within 2 weeks of starting the intervention for 3 consecutive days. Again, 5 to 10 bites is a giant increase, right? For 1, 2 within 2 weeks. So again, we're setting this time. What if it takes them 3 weeks? Do we fail, right? Now I know, because I write goals for insurance as well, okay, we put these little platitudes. But when we're describing behavior goals, especially to parents, we never set timelines, okay? You're giving unreasonable expectations and you're putting yourself in a very bad position, okay? So if you've written goals for insurance, ignore that, right? We're thinking about the ethical code and how would we write goals and explain them to a parent, okay? C, the client will decrease the amount of time she spends off task for 3 consecutive days within 2 weeks of starting the intervention. Okay, so again, we have the issue of the 2 weeks starting the intervention, but with the behavior goal, you typically want to teach a behavior, right? So great, we want to decrease the amount of time she spends off task, but a better way would be teaching her how to get on task, right? And then defining off task a little better. Again, yes, this is a very specifically worded question, right? But we're trying to establish really the ethical reason behind how we write and say behavior goals. And the main thing is not giving unrealistic timelines, okay? We don't go in and say we're going to help your child within 6 months of starting, okay? We can't guarantee anything. And then D, the client will take deep breaths during homework every 5 minutes when given the opportunity for 3 straight sessions. This is the only one where we're not guaranteeing this platitude or setting this platitude, so D's our answer. Again, this is more of an ethical question than a behavior goals question, okay? So take it for what it's worth, right? We're just trying to demonstrate a point here. A response is associated with blank, while a reflex is associated with blank. Now, people have a lot of problems with operant and respondent behavior. First off, understand ABA deals with operant behavior, right? Things maintained by consequences. Respondent behavior is that SR, stimulus response relationship. A good way to remember this and a good way to discriminate on the exam is if the exam uses the word response, you want to think operant. If they use the word reflex, we want to think respondent. A response is associated with operant behavior. a reflex is associated with respondent behavior. And the reason a reflex is associated with respondent behavior is because it's not maintained by consequences. A stimulus occurs, there's a reflex. Respondent behavior, for example, is a sneeze or blinking or your heart rate increasing or you start breathing harder. These are all reflexes, right? And then we start pairing stimuli together to create condition reflexes and condition stimuli, right? On the other hand, a response is one instance of a behavior, okay, and is associated with operant behavior. So this is a good way to, one, remember the difference between operant and respondent behavior, and two, start to discriminate not only for practice exams, but also the real exam. Your client has trouble walking into the clinic each morning. Instead, the parent always carries them. Your BCBA suggests that you should require the client to take 2 steps the first day to earn reinforcement, and then increase the required amount of steps until the client is able to walk into the clinic independently. What procedure are you using? This is a question you should be able to predict without even looking at the answer choices. When I'm tutoring or when I'm teaching, I always recommend to do a bunch of these questions with hiding the answer choices. What that forces you to do is really think hard about what the information is saying. Okay, the information you're given, what is it actually asking? What is it actually saying? That way, you're not reading and just jumping to the answer choices. When studying, do 3 or 4 questions like this. Don't even look at the answer choices. Just try to predict the answer. And if we try to predict this answer, what do we know? Well, we know it's a procedure. We know the client has trouble walking into the clinic each morning, but the parent always carries them. It suggests that you require the client to take 2 steps the first day to earn reinforcement, and then increase the required amount of steps until the client is able to walk into the clinic independently. So what are we doing? We're slowly building up to a terminal behavior by reinforcing approximations. Well, what does that sound like? That sounds like, to me, shaping. It's that easy, okay? And you're going to get so much better at the exam if you start to slow down and really analyze what the question is asking you. It's got nothing to do with generalization, okay? And we're not using a prompting procedure, okay? The parent was prompting them, right? We want them to do it independently. So we're going to reinforce approximations of walking until they're able to reach the terminal behavior. We're using shaping. Bruce Willis fights his way to the top of the building only to see a bomb with the timer ticking down. Bruce must enter a 5-digit code within 20 seconds or the bomb will explode. What's the key here? Okay, well, we know it's a reinforcement schedule question. Okay. The key is must enter this code within 20 seconds. So we know it's going to be a limited hold, right? Because this within a time says you need to be able to complete the reinforcement schedule within a certain amount of time. Meaning we can eliminate D. So we have a VR5, an FR5, and an FI20. Is entering a 5-digit code based on the number of responses, or is it time-based? Well, it's based on the number of responses, right? You must enter 5 code or 5 digits 5 times, and enter 1 code each, 5 responses, however you want to look at it, right? So we can eliminate the FI20. It's not an interval. Now we have VR5 and FR5. Can Bruce sometimes enter a 6-digit code? Can Bruce sometimes enter a 3-digit code? No, it has to be a 5-digit code every single time, making it fixed. So we're looking at an FR5 with a 20-second limited hold. Easy question. You should be able to get this question right in 20 seconds, 30 seconds max. How often should a behavior change intervention be evaluated? All right. Kind of a tricky question. Okay. But let's go through it. So how often should we evaluate our interventions? Okay. When we write interventions as BCBAs, the number one thing is you don't get married to an intervention. Interventions should be organic, they should be fluid, and they should adapt to the needs and changing environments of the client. And in order to do that, how often do we need to evaluate them? Well, how about every week? Okay. Well, what if on Monday the intervention goes haywire and we go a week of just reinforcing the wrong behavior, let's say? It's not often enough. Every 2 weeks is definitely not often enough. What about as necessary? Well, sometimes as necessary might be too late. I've walked into situations before where the client's been headbanging, okay, out of nowhere. And now this would be considered, right, evaluating the intervention, quote unquote, as necessary, when in reality, I should have caught this 2 or 3 days before. Okay. So you really should be evaluating your interventions continually. Okay. Always, always, always be evaluating what you're doing. Don't believe you found the secret sauce and you know everything all the time. The reality is we don't know anything because the environment always changes. Behavior always changes. Okay. It's unpredictable. It's determined, but it's unpredictable. We always have to evaluate not only the behavior, but also the environment it's in. You're a behavior analyst working with a family of 3 children. You successfully train the parents and siblings of the client to implement a punishment procedure for the client's aggression in home. Which of the following steps should you take next? All right, let's break it down, okay? Let's think about it. Let's hide the answer choices. Which of the following steps should we take next? We know that we're a behavior analyst working with a family of 3 children. You train the parents and siblings of the client to implement a punishment procedure for the client's aggression in home. So what are some possibilities, right? They are able to do it. So some possibilities might be we need to monitor, right, the parents and siblings implementing this procedure. We also need to be aware that punishing this aggression in home without changing the punishment elsewhere, the schedule elsewhere, can lead to what? Can lead to behavior contrast, right? If the client is being punished for aggression at home and it's decreasing at home, we run the risk of that aggression increasing elsewhere, and what should be behavior contrast. Okay, so we might have to warn them about that. So let's look at A. Design a punishment plan for the siblings. Are the siblings your client? No, we are not servicing the siblings. Be very careful about falling into this trap. All right. We don't service the siblings, we service the client. Inform the parents that aggression might increase at school. Okay, that's what we predicted, right? Behavior contrast. If we're punishing aggression at home, well, there's a chance that elsewhere this behavior might start to increase. Identify the function of aggression. Hopefully, if you are already training parents and siblings, you definitely know the function already. That should have been done first. And then D, teach the family how to use differential reinforcement next. Not necessarily, right? We do want to start reinforcing something else. We never use punishment alone, but it might not even be differential reinforcement, right? It might just be reinforcement by itself. So the only one that makes sense is informing the parents that aggression might increase at school. Okay, thanks for watching. We'll be back next week with 10 more questions. As always, email me if you have any questions at all. I'm happy to help. Looking for our other 2 exams and this exam, check out bcbastudy.com. Work hard, study hard. See you soon.